Hi there, podcast fans. I'm Thom Gibbs. Welcome back to Telegraph Audio Football Club. Yes, we've dusted down the artwork, fired up the rickety old RSS feed, and bravely shunned the audio recording facility to bring this, a special one-off, probably, return of your favourite football podcast of 2019. Why, you might ask? Well, Jose Mourinho was sacked. That's not why, really. It's because we wanted to hear from the Telegraph's football experts about everything that's happened since Sunday in this extraordinary episode in the sport's history. With me to talk about the doomed European Super League and its fallout are Jason Burt. Hi, Jason.
Hello there, Tom.
Sounding chipper. Luke Edwards.
Hi, Tom. I feel like I need to sound chipper now. You're calling people out and say hello.
Much better. We got it.
Tom, I'm tired. You've been working too
We're
hard.
all tired, Jason. We're exhausted from the work and from the mental exertion. But this will give you a boost, Jason. I'm delighted to give someone their Audio Football Club debut. It's Mike McGrath. How are you, Mike?
Thanks for my first cap.
Are you going to dedicate it to anyone, Mike? The family, perhaps? The president of Juventus?
Yeah, I think I'll dedicate it to Bruce Buck and the other chairman of our fine Big Six.
Yeah, what a great bunch. Let's just start, shall we, by acknowledging quite how weird the last few days have felt in football. Jason, have you ever known anything like this in all your time covering the game?
No. I think on the weirdometer, it's right up there. It's 10 out of 10. It's 20 out of 10 almost. I mean, I've been doing this job for 19 years. I've been involved in, obviously, big takeover, Abramovich coming into English football, all the big transfers and deals that have happened, all the other big scandals that have happened, Ashley Cole shooting somebody with an air rifle, all sorts of things going on. Even Project Big Picture. I mean, obviously a great story that we did earlier this season, but this scoops everything really in terms of the scale of it. Genuinely thought at one stage it might happen on Sunday, but that quickly sort of turned. But no, absolutely, in terms of the scale, in terms of the outcry, in terms of the coverage, in terms of the interventions at every single level, nothing touches this.
Yeah, and I suppose a sense as well that there might be more to come. The stuff that we're learning about it and what's happened in the background is almost going to be as interesting in the coming days and weeks. But Luke, what do you think was the tipping point over the weekend? When did this plan become unsustainable?
Well, I agree with Jason. I think on Sunday, we all sort of thought this was going to be forced through, and we were incredibly sad and incredibly angry about it. And I think the tipping point probably came on Monday morning, because I think we all woke up to rage, really, and disgust at what they were proposing. I've never seen in football fans pull together the way they did, and it was fans across the scale. It wasn't just fans of the 14 Premier League clubs who weren't going to be involved in the Super League. It was crucially the fans of those 6 clubs as well. And I think basically what happened was, I think the government could see the level of anger and animosity there was to this plan. It wasn't just fans. I don't just mean fans as in fans who go to games. I mean players and things like that. Players who were fans long before they became players and managers. There was this unity of contempt for what had happened. And I think what you saw pretty fast was that mobilising, that organising. It was incredibly loud. It was impossible for the government to ignore. So they were very, very strong in it. And I think also when you read the Premier League rule book or law book, Jason could probably clarify that for me, they had that rule that's prevented them joining another competition. And I suddenly thought to myself, and I think I wrote on Monday, they've actually got the grounds to kick them out of the Premier League if it went that far. And I think as soon as my brain started going down that route, I thought we could probably stop it, but I didn't think it would happen within 48 hours. That is the real shock of this. To unveil it on Sunday night and it be all over by Tuesday evening is embarrassing, quite frankly, for those involved.
Really quite astonishing. I think I'm always going to remember Monday Night Football as the moment where it all crystallised. That was just an extraordinary evening of television, and to see Sky undermining its own product in the way that Gary Neville saying about the League Cup final, well, who cares? Just really, really unusual. What about the players, Mike? Was there a sense they weren't going to go for it from that moment on Monday Night Football when James Milner said, "I don't like it"?
Well, I think I agree with Luke. It was that outrage on Monday really set the tone for the next 24 hours and until the collapse, and through that day as well. But I thought that evening was a big turning point because of, first of all, that there were some fans as well, which almost caused almost like a almost like a picket line for the players to go through. And then when Jurgen Klopp spoke, and I just thought it was a really significant moment when James Milner and Patrick Bamford as well spoke afterwards and said that they were against it, because I think until then you weren't quite sure how it was going to go, because players obviously are employed by the clubs, they're not employed by the Premier League, and you don't quite know how they're going to feel about it. And I think there was a few things during the day. I think it was Bruno Fernandes. He posted on his Twitter effectively that you can't buy football dreams, and I think that they, perhaps it was the right person to speak to. That was James Milner, because he hasn't, he's very articulate, and he hasn't got 10 years of his career ahead of him that he's got to worry about either. Even though even though he's got a few years left in him, but it's not like he's got the next decade to worry about. And I think he spoke from the heart.
Yeah. What sort of state do we think football is in now? Where has it been left by this? Do we know, Jason, if there's been any deal done yet with UEFA on these new Champions League rules and everything that will come with those?
Well, that's basically been waved through on Monday. I think there may be some opportunity to go back over it. They may actually try and change a few things, but obviously the expansion of the Champions League to a 36-team tournament from 2024 is basically now being waved through. And that was supposed to be the deal that kept all these clubs on board, the one they've reneged upon. And that's what so angered the UEFA chief executive, Alexander Seferin. I think what's interesting, and the real feeling I've got from this, which is going to be quite fascinating going forward, is how the other Premier League clubs feel about it. And they said to me, I was talking to a lot of them yesterday, and they said to me, we feel emboldened for once, because these big six had one shot. They had one bullet basically to fire at them, that they would do this breakaway. And it's been going on for years and years and years and years and years. Side room meetings, threats, veiled threats. We'll do this, we'll do that if you don't listen to us. Premier League meetings are often dominated just by the big six. A lot of the other clubs don't say anything whatsoever. On Tuesday, 14 clubs were there and 14 clubs spoke. And they all had the opportunity to speak. And some of them came away thinking, actually, this is the way it should be. We feel empowered. Now, what will be interesting is when they get those big six back in the room, how do they react towards them? They've had their chance. They've shot the bolts, as it were, and it hasn't worked. So what can they do now? And that's the interesting thing. I think the really sort of fascinating side of it is the American owners, because they are still committed to some form of this. It's whether or not they can actually come back to the table in the future. But for now, I really think it is dead. I can't see it coming forward for quite some time now. They'll try and do different things by stealth to get more money, get more power, get more say. But I think the other clubs, and I hope they're good to their word, that the other clubs feel they have a bit of power back.
This is something I suppose each of you is going to have a take on, given the clubs you cover. I can see there's a sort of us versus them thing going to happen with those 14 against the big six. But is there a consensus of opinion amongst that remaining 14? Because presumably a club that knows it's going to be fighting relegation is going to feel differently to a club like Everton, who had things shaken out a little bit differently. Perhaps in 10 years with a new stadium, if Ancelotti stays, they might have been in Tottenham's position for the last week and been invited to this big six. Will that group of 14 hold, given that it represents quite a diverse group of clubs?
Well, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think you look at clubs like Everton and Wolverhampton Wanderers and clubs that have got ambition, West Ham, to be in that top six. I think what will make it hold is actually the reaction. Because if you've seen the reaction in the last 48 hours, do they want to get involved in any of that? They probably dodged the bullet. Clubs like Everton, who might have been the 7th team that was invited to this, or Leicester, who might be the 7th or 8th team invited to this. I think the fact that they've actually seen what's happened will make them think we've escaped there. That's been a lucky break for us. And actually, by staying within that 14, and you can look at that globally as well in terms of Europe. If you look at Paris Saint-Germain and Bayern Munich, they were very smart. They thought, no, this isn't going to work. We're going to align ourselves with UEFA. We won't go down this route with these clubs. And now they look stronger than ever. So I think the 14 clubs, for the time being, will stay together, and I'm hoping they will actually talk more to each other and be as almost like a little bargaining unit themselves if this 6 are going to carry on being silly.
What are the vibes you're getting out of the clubs closest to your patches, Luke and Mike?
Well, you don't get anything out of Newcastle and Mike Ashley, but I do.
You don't anyway.
I do believe that there was strong opposition to it. I did get a call from someone at St James's Park on Monday, without blowing my own trumpet, thanking me for the piece I'd written about kick them out. So that was interesting and telling. I am led to believe from those close to Mike Ashley that he was against it, but then you also know with someone like Mike Ashley that if he'd have been invited to it, he'd have probably said, we're all in for that. So, he's not exactly a man of the people who's had the great best interests of English football at heart for the last 14 years. So I think across the 14, as far as I can gather, as Jason has just said, there was universal opposition to it. And they should be emboldened by it. As Jason's just said, they should be emboldened. They've looked their biggest threat, they've stared them down, and the others I've lost. The big 6 have lost. They've suffered a humiliating defeat, quite frankly. And they've now got to come back. So all of these threats, all of this, we're going to go it alone. We're going to go and get the breakaway. Doesn't wash anymore. Doesn't carry any water anymore. And let's not forget, what is it, 6 months since Project Big Picture? When they ended up condemning their own plan in the subsequent Premier League meeting. The rest of the Premier League will see what these owners, I'm not going to say clubs, but what these owners are about, what they stand for, what they want to do. And now is a chance to actually just wrestle a little bit of that power back. And personally, I know we might discuss this later on, but I would like to see them punished. I don't know how you could do that. I don't know how realistic that is within the framework of the Premier League rules. But I would like to see them take a points deduction, personally. That's just my personal opinion. I'd like to see them start next season with a 10-point points deduction, and then Man City will probably win the Premier League again. But anyway, I would like to see them punished. I really would.
I was speaking to a few lower league clubs, EFL, which might have been forgotten a little bit in this, and they were definitely concerned about what they would get out of it, and the fact that they would suffer from it. I think what they were saying was, there was a lovely big press release saying that there's going to be billions of pounds and there's going to be solidarity payments, but it was very, very vague in terms of how that would be filtered down to them, whereas at the moment they know what they get from the Premier League, and if the 6 were booted out of the Premier League, then the broadcast money that they get for the 14 remaining would be so much less that it would eventually they get less money. So I think that might have been forgotten a little bit in the last couple of days, and I think just in general, I thought it was there's a touch of irony the fact that City tonight are playing Aston Villa, who have won a European Cup in their history, and there are things that people just cannot buy, which is stories like Leicester's in 2016, and I think that's part of the outcry is the fact that it wanted to be a closed shop, which wouldn't have allowed these things to have happened.
There is one big problem, Tom, that obviously that's caused by all of this for the club, not for us. This is great for us. Is the government review, the fan-led review. This is really bad news for all the clubs. This is not what they want. Basically, the government again to get involved. Now, the government, as I think we touched on already, did act very quickly. I think that surprised the Big 6. They didn't expect the government to get involved in the level they have. And I think in the Premier League meeting on Tuesday, Richard Master, the chief executive, made it very, very clear to everyone present the government would legislate against this. They would stop it. It was not happening. So all the clubs left that meeting yesterday thinking this is over, it will finish. And in that meeting, they're already getting messages that Chelsea and Manchester City were wavering. But I think the government review will go on, and there is going to be issues around ownership, around representation, around all sorts of issues around football, which a lot of these other owners who aren't involved in the Big 6 won't like either. So there's been even talk of the German model, hasn't there? 51% share ownership. I think that's going to be difficult to do, but there may be an element saying, well, we'll just give them 10%, and that could be a blocking 10%. So I don't think these guys like Roman Abramovich, but also down towards other owners further down the league, want to dilute their ownership. They don't want other people to get involved, and they certainly don't want to give the fans a say in that way. So I think that they've almost unleashed this kind of beast that can actually help us and help the fans, but might not help the clubs or the club owners, rather.
It does seem, and I don't know whether this is right, but people are actually saying this might have been a sort of hidden benefit of Brexit, believe it or not, in that the government could act without the EU so swiftly that it could literally just say with it, right, we're gonna do this, and that threat was real because suddenly it was like it's nothing to do with the EU. The EU can't get involved in this. They can't go into any human right or whatever court it would go to in Europe. And I mean, I didn't see that coming, but I suspect the clubs didn't see it coming either.
No, they didn't. You're absolutely right, Luke.
Good work from you, Luke, there to make a claim to get on Chopper's Brexit podcast. Well done for that. It's absolutely seamless. Let's just return to Manchester City, who you were talking about, Mike. It was they and Chelsea who were first to formally withdraw on Wednesday night. Why was that?
Cynically, you could say that the first, when it looked like it wasn't going to happen, that the first would be the heroes, wouldn't they? It'd be great PR. I think it's a little bit more complex than that for City because they were late to the party on it, and I think they saw how things were aligned. They saw 5 of the biggest clubs in England aligned, ready to go. 5 of them, which by the way were part of the gang of clubs who wanted them banned from Europe while they were awaiting their CAS verdict. So they knew they had some enemies there. And on the other side, they got UEFA. If they join that side, UEFA, they've not been great friends at the best times either. You got on that side, you got Bayern Munich and you've got Paris Saint-Germain, who opposed in terms of Qatar and Abu Dhabi. So I think they were caught in a really difficult place, and then when it looked, when all clubs obviously saw the reaction, and when there was clubs were starting to wait, and I thought who was going to go first, and as Jason mentioned, it looked like it was City and Chelsea, and when it happened, the rest of it just all fell down.
That's one of the things that confuses me about this most of all. As you say, Mike, it was such a PR win for them to get out first. I mean, a really good PR win would have been not being involved in the first place, being able to say, yeah, we've seen this and we don't want into it. I mean, that seems very, very obvious now, but it seems like that could have been quite obvious last week. Which club did you feel like was most up for it, Luke?
Oh, gosh, I didn't say that right.
England,
Okay.
Manchester United and Liverpool.
I'm going to go with Manchester United, who also delivered the worst statement of extracting themselves from it as well. When there's like 24 pages dedicated to Ed Woodward's resignation, and then 3 paragraphs to no apology, no hint of regret. Yeah, I'm going to go with. I totally agree with Jason. In Manchester United. And then closely followed, I suspect, by Liverpool and Arsenal. The American owners, you talk to anyone at Premier League boardroom level, and those American owners, since they've arrived in English football, have constantly, in private, moaned about relegation, and they've never understood it, they've never got it, and they have been moving or wanting to move towards what I will loosely term franchise soccer from the moment they arrived. And look, Manchester United already had unpopular owners. That they're not going to win any popularity contest anyway. They probably thought, sod it, we'll just do what we want to do. I think the big loser in this is John W. Henry at Liverpool, because I think the damage that they have done by being so enthusiastic and behind this, the fact they put Joel Glazer, a Manchester United director, quotes on the press release of their own official club website, they've had an absolute shocker. That is all I'm going to say on that one. I think they will really, really struggle to rebuild some relationships on Merseyside.
Will Henry and Fenway stick around on Merseyside, Jason? The same question about the Glazers at Man United. Now that this big payday is dead, are they going to look to sell their clubs?
I mean, I think it will be a natural expectation that they might look at selling their football clubs. But I think the big problem they've got is, will they get anywhere near the money they want for them? Especially in the current market, obviously with the pandemic. But they built a lot of money, a lot of value, into their clubs over the last few years. You look at Liverpool alone, what it's now worth compared to what they bought it for. But I think if they're so committed to this sort of model going forward, and this is what they want in terms of football, then yeah, they need to have a look at it and decide whether or not they want to stick around. I mean, obviously, the same applies to Stan Kroenke at Arsenal. I think he has probably taken Arsenal, well, as far as he can take it, if not, overstayed his welcome by several years already. So I just think all three of those ownerships will be in question. But I think the big issue is, who can afford to buy them? Who can afford to buy those clubs? Manchester United would cost an absolutely unbelievable amount of money, and who would be able to do that, and who would want to do that either? Because if you buy a club like Manchester United for the money that the Glazers want for it, you're not going to get much of a return, because the club is, that's top dollar, literally. But I think they will look at it and think, is it worth us carrying forward? Definitely. I think Fenway aren't in it as football fans; they're sport franchise owners. And if owning a football club in the Premier League doesn't work for them on the longer term, then they'll cut and run.
It is a baffling investment for anyone with billions and billions of pounds. Football, it just seems so risky and so fraught with unexpected dangers that you just don't come with other places you might put your money. Let's look forward a little bit now. And I think one of the main questions at the moment, Mike, is how long is it going to be until something like this gets mooted again?
I think it will depend on. I think it would depend on punishments, if there are any. It will depend on what the government do as well. I think that the reaction of the last 2 days would probably be quite a good warning sign as to where the public lie on it. And I think the American owners in particular have just totally misread the room, and possibly through arrogance thought that it might even be, it might even be a good idea. People might think this is good. So I think there's enough there to say that it's not going to come back immediately. But I just think it's just football's warning that, it can't happen. It cannot happen again, and we have to have some forms of sanctions which make sure that this kind of power grab is just unavailable to the very top. I'm not really providing many solutions there. I'm only just saying.
I think what they'll need to do is look at the rules. I think they have to look at the rule book, and I think that's what they're going to look at. I think there'll be a drive to have certain rules in place to just prevent this, full stop. And if clubs try and do this again, I think they will be punished in ways that maybe, for example, in American sport, you can be forced to sell your club under your franchise, your club under certain. If you breach certain rules, you can be forced to sell. And I think they will try and look at that, for example, and say, look, if you do certain things which are not in the interests of the Premier League as a whole, and obviously breaking away from it is clearly not in the interest of the Premier League, then you will have to sell. You'll be forced to sell. So you have to sign up to those rules to be part of the Premier League. I think that's what they'll try and do. And obviously then there'll also be the threat of that ongoing threat of government intervention. So I think they've headed this off very skillfully and very forcefully. I think the danger will be what kind of deals will these clubs try and cut with UEFA, who've had an almighty scare, at the very least, UEFA, because obviously, although they came out very strongly, they were slightly dependent on everyone else backing them and doing things. So I think that there is a danger that these clubs might still go back to UEFA. And despite Ceferin calling them snakes and so on and so forth, for a fact that they'll be back in a room together fairly soon.
Forgive me for a little bit of cynicism about this, but there's been a lot of government talk over the past few days, big talk about what they could do, interventions, about reformations to football. But it seems to me that the big PR win for the government is in the bag already, and it didn't take much work. It was all over and done with in 2 days. Is there the political will to actually do something about football long term, or is that just going to be a too expensive and too difficult a path to tread?
I think it's very simple, Tom. So if it's very simple, they'll do it, basically, and it's not going to be very expensive. As you say, it's a great PR win. Boris Johnson doesn't give a stuff about football, really, but actually knows it's a very popular sport. And we saw that with Project Restart. The desire to get football back on our TV screens, they thought would be sort of, help the masses out there to get through lockdown. And to a degree it has done. So I think there's two things going on. I think they know it's an easy PR win to continue to sort of act in this way. There are simple things they can do legislatively to try and change this and stop it ever happening again. And also, one of the things that somebody said to me the other day was the last thing they want is all the other football clubs collapsing, so they're going to have to prop them up. And we've seen that already, because the government don't want to bail out football. They've done it through the pandemic, so they're not going to do it now. So they don't want that to happen either. They think it's a sport, awash with money, should look after itself. And also, again, without being funny, you look at sort of exports, UK PLC exports, the Premier League is one of the most successful exports we have as a country. Why would they want that to go away? If you go anywhere in the world and talk about the Premier League, it's one of the positive aspects of coming from the UK.
We talk about soft power and British influence around the world. We've taken a bit of a hammering for various things in the last 2 or 3 years. So actually having the vibrant Premier League and protecting that, as Jason said, that is huge for a government. That's actually part of foreign policy. Or should be, or will be part of their foreign policy. So they will act, and I think they've only got themselves to blame, these owners, now. And I think that's what they will be in fear of next, is what is coming from the government. That is what they'll be worried about now. They've lost this battle. What battle are they going to lose further down the line?
Let's just have a word for the fans, Luke. It seems to me that everything now that's left of this season is in danger of feeling a little bit meaningless. Do you share that feeling?
No, I don't actually. And I have to say, I wrote something this morning that made me very emotional as I was writing it. And I was writing about the cheer that went up at Stamford Bridge last night when news of Chelsea pulling out of the Super League came out. And it was a reminder. It was that sound, that cheer, that collective roar of emotion, unleashing of emotion that I haven't heard in a football stadium since March last year. So I think the fans can be very, very pleased because, as I said at the very start of this podcast, it's been universal. It wasn't just the clubs who were affected by it. It was clubs from every rung of the football ladder in all four corners of the country have come together and they've got something done. They have reminded people, because this political intervention only comes because the fans, there's so much anger amongst the population as a whole. That's why politicians act. And they have brought this Super League to its knees with the help of government. As I say, the government only acted because they were so angry. And it was a reminder that football, after years and years and years, probably my entire adult life, of thinking that fans no longer matter in football, we have seen that when they mobilise, when they unite, and when they are angry and pursuing a common cause, they are still the most powerful force in football. So I feel I found that very heartwarming, actually, when I reflected on it last night. And I hope that we see, that fans can be a little bit more confident now that football does still belong to them. So, no, I don't think this season is I haven't really answered your question there, but I don't think the rest of this season is meaningless. I think if anything, it's got more meaning for me now. And I just can't wait until, hopefully at the start of next season, we start having full stadiums again, because I've had enough of the empty football version. As everybody who knows me knows, I can't stand it. I hate going to empty stadiums, and the sooner they come back, the better. And just that little roar, that little video of Chelsea fans celebrating. I found it joyous, to be honest with you.
With you all the way, Luke. Let's wrap up with a question for all of you. I'll come to you each in turn, which is, have we learned anything from this? And is anything going to change? Because I feel like the Premier League and Sky and the clubs that are involved in this, and even some of the clubs that weren't involved in this, just want things to go back to how they were as soon as possible, because the product is eroded for as long as this weird mood remains around football. Is that going to happen, Mike? Or is this going to mean lasting change for football?
I think it's opened our eyes to some of the problems that we have, but I think effectively our domestic, what we have is a good product. It's not, it is like, as Jason said, it's a great British export. I think what we learned from it, I think we've learned a lot about power and the power of fans and also the true colours of these clubs. And I don't think will ever forget that. And I think it's going to be very, very different if those American owners ever step foot in those cities again. It's going to be very, very different for them. And that's going to be the change. And that from going on from now, I do think though that it's going to be more of the same in terms of the product that we have. But I do think that it's a really good product, and we're much better for it.
What about you, Jason? Learned anything?
Yeah, I think there's nothing to be afraid of. I think that's what I've learned. I mean, I think that we always feared that this would happen at some stage, that this would be a real, threat to the future of the game in this country, that these clubs felt they had the power to dictate terms at every level in this country, in the Premier League, and just wider than that. And it's been proven with every force that's been harnessed against them that they don't. actually. If there's something to be afraid of, then why don't we try and mould football into the sport that we want it to be? And the government review is quite interesting because, in some ways I'm against it because I think it's a dangerous thing for government to be involved. But if it's done in the right manner, I think there could be good that comes of it. And I really feel strongly about the ownership issue that, a lot of people, the German model divides people. Some people think it's great. Some people think it's just, the hipsterish and it's rubbish and so on and so forth. And it's not quite what it seems because obviously you've got big companies behind these German clubs. But there are reasons why they don't get involved in these sorts of things. There is fan representation, and we should have fan representation on the board of every football club in this country. That's what I would like to see come out of this.
Your closing remarks, please, Luke Edwards.
No, I think we've had our eyes opened, and I think the owners of those football clubs who are involved, I think they may never recover from this personally. Maybe with the exception of Manchester City and Chelsea, maybe they bailed quickly enough to get out of it. But certainly the American owners, and we've been very silent on Tottenham here, the lottery ticket winners, the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory golden ticket winners, who somehow managed to get themselves a ticket to the invite to the elite of European football. So
they've been in the European Cup more recently than anyone except Liverpool.
Well, great, yeah, but they're not one of Europe's elite. Oh, they're not even one in the Premier League league. But anyway, sorry, I think my eyes are opened, are wide open now. I don't think it'll happen again. I think we've killed it for a generation at least. But I do think those owners, particularly at Liverpool, Manchester United, and Arsenal, I think they may find that their time, this is the beginning of the end for all three of them.
Before we go, let's have a bit of recommended reading from each of you, please. We've all been working very hard over the past few days. What is something you've written, Luke, which you would instruct everyone to read? And we'll stick a link in the show notes.
Just put Luke Edwards into Google, Telegraph, and it's all magic.
The autocomplete on that is really bad, though.
No, you can read the piece I've written about the power of fans. I think that made me emotional writing it. And I'm not just saying that. I did actually well up a little bit writing it this morning. So please read that because I think it's a reminder of who football belongs to in this country.
What have you got, Mike?
Well, it's not 24 hours, more like 12 hours. I've been working on. Obviously, we haven't mentioned that Ed Woodward is going at Man United after 9 years. So after working on that story, I did every single senior player that he'd signed during his time there and ranked them from best to worst. So you can agree with it or not. There's some there's some good buys in there and some stinkers as well, which we all know. But they're all there.
I've never not clicked on a ranking of anything, and I look forward to reading that later. How about you, Jason?
Well, there was a piece I did yesterday, which I was quite pleased with, which was talking to a number of people who were in the Premier League meeting. Sometimes it's quite difficult to get hold of people. Obviously, yesterday, with the fact that it was quite a volatile day and people did want to talk, they were a bit more open. They were all sworn to secrecy on the record, but a bit more open off the record. And it was quite interesting talking to them about the mood within that and the kind of sense of euphoria when, for example, they were in the meeting when they found out the captains were going to have this meeting today that's now been cancelled, on Wednesday it's now been cancelled. But I think there was a sense of euphoria from some of the clubs around that. And then there was sort of the seeping out of the fact that Liverpool and Chelsea and Manchester City were not so sure about going forward. I think all of those sorts of details that I was getting from people who were in the meeting was quite interesting. And that's a piece I would recommend.
Good stuff. Any of you going to ask me what of my pieces that people should read?
Yes, Tom. What piece what piece of yours would you recommend, Tom?
Oh, Luke, thank you so much for asking. We spoke about it earlier. It was the terrible statements that came out from all the clubs. I've been through those today and I've annotated them line by line. I tell you what, great day for the stakeholders. A lot of shout outs to the stakeholders in all of those statements. So very well done to them. Luke, Jason, Mike, thank you so much for joining us on this very special episode of the Audio Football Club podcast. We may be back at some point in future. Who can tell? You can still send us an email. Let us know what you would like from this podcast in future. It's afcpodcast@telegraph.co.uk. Thanks for your company. I'll talk to you again soon.